morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where the movie news that many of you are most anticipating still has yet to drop. Yet rumors abound. And of course I'm talking about when is the damn Justice League trailer going to drop. The official one. We've gotten Comic-Con reels, we've gotten behind the scenes reels, but we want an actual trailer. And say what you will about the DCEU, but one place they undoubtedly shine without any argument is with their trailers, right? So it should be pretty special. Now, there was a rumor it was going to debut on Christmas Day. I never quite believed that one, but I kind of thought it would debut on December 27th. That didn't happen. And still, no word from Warner Brothers or Zack Snyder as to when we're going to see this thing. But a new rumor has emerged from someone called Wayne Enterprises. They're calling themselves Wayne Enterprises on Twitter. They're not officially affiliated with the DCEU. But their rumor, and one of you pointed this out to me, is that the Justice League trailer will debut on January 15th on a CW Special. And this seems pretty legit to me because, of course, this is something that the DCEU has done before, showcasing their movies with a CW Special, hosted last time by Jeff Johns and Kevin Smith. And that was when we got our first look at Wonder Woman footage, etc. It was pretty good. And, of course, it ties into the strong fan following that they've developed over there on the CW with their shows. It's basically become, in many ways, the DC network. So they have a show a night right now, which through Monday through Thursday, which is pretty amazing. But anyway, I not only think that this is exciting because it's a legit, I think, like a strong rumor as to when we might get the Justice League trailer, but the rumor also includes, because the last special focused on a couple of DCEU movies, and so sure enough, this rumor says that we might get some Gotham City Sirens news as well. That movie, of course, is moving at breakneck speed, and the rumor with that film is that it's going to be shooting actually during the summer, so they can release it as soon as possible. And interestingly, Wayne Enterprises said on Twitter that perhaps there will be some casting announcements for Gotham City Sirens. My money is on Killer Frost debuting because her profile has suddenly become really high profile in the comics, especially in the new Suicide Squad versus Justice League comic. And they make it pretty clear that they need Killer Frost if they're going to stand any chance against the Justice League in that fight. And she turns out to be pretty darn effective. So I wouldn't be surprised if you hear a casting announcement for Killer Frost, maybe Poison Ivy, and maybe also Catwoman. Maybe they'll drop Catwoman or Poison Ivy. They might maybe drop Catwoman because there's been so much Catwoman over the years. And they're like, why revisit that again? We'll see what they decide to do. And also, Catwoman has never really been a true villain, but if you were to have Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and Killer Frost, that's like a legit group of female villains. That would be pretty interesting. And Harley would be the least powerful of the bunch, so we'll see how she fares in that group. But I think it sounds pretty exciting, and so that's the new rumor. I thought I'd share it with you, especially because I think it seems like one of the most solid rumors we've heard as of late. So keep an eye out, and they probably might announce that special right after New Year's. And it makes sense also because there's nothing really coming out in January, so they'd have like the whole half of the month to focus on the DCEU upcoming slate. So I think that's pretty exciting. And they do have a lot to announce because they've had to shuffle some projects with losing their Flash director, etc. All right, so anyway, that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day, let's move over to Star Wars, where Ben Mendelsohn had a particularly illuminating interview with Collider. It was a print interview. It broke the other day, and a lot of industry trades have even picked it up because methinks Ben Mendelsohn didn't see the loose lips sink starships poster that they made up when they were shooting The Force Awakens, because he was unusually candid with describing how they make these big films, and I don't think that people really wanted it. I don't think the studios want people to know just how unartistic, I guess you could say, these films are made. Now, it turned out great. It turned out really well. I loved Rogue One. It was my second favorite film of the year. If you haven't checked out my top 10 list movies of the year, it's over on the main Beyond the Trailer channel right now. But anyway, what Ben Mendelsohn revealed is that not only is there a vastly different version of Rogue One out there because of the rewrites and the reshoots, but because that's how it was always intended to be, and that every scene and every line was shot several times, several different ways to give the filmmaking team choices in the editing room, which I find absolutely shocking. I mean, how we talked about Adam Driver saying, I don't really, talking to Rian Johnson has made me get a better understanding of Kylo Ren. And you're like, you've played him for a whole movie. How do you not have a better understanding of him by now? And this idea that, you're doing different line readings, I mean, how are you supposed to put a character together? I mean, you really are. It really does make you like a little action figure that Lucasfilm is playing with. So I guess what happens is they took all those pieces, they went into the editing room, and so it became like this puzzle, right, where you don't use all the pieces, which makes it an even harder puzzle to assemble. And I guess Gareth Edwards, they put it together, and they're like, we don't like what you chose. So they had Tony Gilroy come in, and they said, oh, that's a pretty good job assembling the pieces. We like what you chose. And then he and Disney went and did reshoots to get the puzzle pieces that they were missing that never were filmed. But I think that it's, again, I love the way it turned out. And I guess if you have a really strong writer putting it together, it works. And, maybe this is just something that Gareth Edwards came up with. I don't know if J.J. Abrams did this with The Force Awakens. But it's a scary thought to think that this is how franchise filmmaking might evolve. That they don't have character arcs and they don't have a set script. That they just have, they shoot like a grab bag. And they're like, well, we'll put it together later. I mean, I hope it always turns out as well as Rogue One did. But I was thinking the other day, I was like, who's a really good writer in Hollywood? Like someone who I felt I could depend on, right? If I was like, oh, hire this person to be your screenwriter, and I feel confident that you're going to get a great script back, right? I don't know who I would pick. Maybe there are some writer-directors out there, but even then I feel sometimes they get a little too in their own heads. I mean, like, who's a good writer who, knows the business? I'm talking like William Goldman, think back to scripts like, it used to be people wanted to buy movie scripts and read them like novels because they were so amazing and could stand on their own. And it's not the case anymore. And I think that Hollywood, and TV is like really beating Hollywood and giving Hollywood a run for their money these days. And that's because TV has made the writer king. So I would love it if maybe Hollywood would be like, maybe we should go back to having a little more respect for screenwriters and, appreciating their work, right? And maybe we shouldn't greenlight movies until they have a really good script. I know that's a crazy idea, everybody, but maybe that's something we should think about doing. Because that's what TV does. I mean, they rewrote Westworld, halfway through. And I think Westworld has a lot of the problems that movies do. And not being, I think, as well constructed as one would like. And they're still well-written movies. I think Eddie the Eagle's well-written, The Accountant's well-written. But, I'm talking, go watch Die Hard. I mentioned this when I was talking about Christmas movies. Go watch Die Hard, one of the best scripts ever written. And so I would really hope that Hollywood would eventually return to this. Although the last thing I want to talk about is if this is how they're making Star Wars movies now, maybe that will give them some options when it comes to dealing with the tragic consequences of Carrie Fisher's death for episode 8. If they shot it, doing, and I can't imagine what Carrie Fisher, considering her fantastic wit and being a writer herself, how she would feel shooting a movie like this, right? I can see why maybe it would breed a little bit of contempt in her for the whole Star Wars experience, which she occasionally let slip, her contempt towards the whole franchise. She loved it too, of course, but there were those other. It was a love-hate relationship, I think you could say. But anyway, maybe it'll give them some options to better deal with the situation. All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is that Damien Chazelle, hot off of La La Land, isn't wasting any time. He's not waiting for Oscars to materialize, and that's smart because they might not. It's, I think, a pretty even Oscar race right now between La La Land, Moonlight, and Manchester by the Sea. So he's getting his deals together now, which is very smart. And he can make more deals if he ends up winning the Oscars. So, and this is something we always talk about. Secure your next project before your other project is finished, because you never know how it's going to quite turn out, right? Like, usually it's before the movie. Like make your deals on the buzz of a movie before it actually opens in theaters, in case it doesn't open as big as it's supposed to. I mean, sometimes you're pleasantly surprised. Ben Mendelsohn, for instance, we were just talking about him, got the to be the sheriff of Nottingham in the upcoming Taron Egerton Robin Hood movie because of his Rogue One performance and how strongly that movie was received. And that deal didn't go through until after the film was released. But anyway, Damien Chazelle putting his next deal together, and he's taken Ryan Gosling with him. I'm sure Emma Stone is like, what the hell? All right, so anyway, although I think Damien Chazelle, if you think of Whiplash and La La Land, he's very much, I think, a male storyteller. I think that's very much the perspective that he works from. And I really liked Whiplash. I have serious problems with La La Land, but I do feel he created a very sympathetic character in Ryan Gosling's Sebastian. And Ryan Gosling, of course, contributed to that with his performance. So they're going to reteam for the story of Neil Armstrong called First Man. It's based on his autobiography. And it's going to cover 1961 to 1969 in the space race, which to me is fascinating because Hidden Figures takes place at around the end of that time period. And I hope Hidden Figures does well. I mean, it would be a shame. Hidden Figures is such a great movie, also on my top 10 list for the year. And it does a really good job talking about the unsung heroes of the space program. Not just those, the African-American women who were working there at the time, but also just the scientists. Like you think about it, who gets a parade? The astronauts get a parade. What about the people who made it possible? I feel like just like movie stars, behind the camera versus in front of the camera talent, everybody contributes and everybody should be celebrated for the results. But anyway, Neil Armstrong is getting a movie, and I hope we'll see how it does in comparison to Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures hasn't gone wide yet, though, so hopefully that movie will do well. But speaking of box office, I think it's interesting. I wouldn't have gone with Ryan Gosling for this role unless that they're going to make it I don't know how you can make a low-budget space movie. Maybe they'll find a way. But I wouldn't have picked Ryan Gosling for this, actually, to be honest with you. I don't think he looks particularly like Neil Armstrong. But also, Ryan Gosling has not proven himself as a box office draw yet. He's certainly a well-respected actor, but audiences just aren't inspired to go and see him. Maybe change is on the horizon, but if I were a studio executive, I'm not betting with my movie. It's going to cost me a couple extra million if it suddenly materializes. I'll wait, right? Because right now, La La Land, it's gone like wide, but it's only in 700 theaters. Usually wide is over 1,000, sometimes 2,000. But it's doing well, but it's only up to 22 million domestically so far. It has a long ways to go before it's considered like what you would want First Man to make at the box office, right? And his biggest hits to date are The Big Short with about 70 million domestic, but of course he wasn't a lead. He was one of the leads, but I think that's, had Brad Pitt, Steve Carell, Christian Bale, and that's not even a big gross anyway, 70 million. And then Crazy Stupid Love, when he also teamed with Emma Stone, although they did also work together on Gangster Squad, which was a colossal flop. But Crazy Stupid Love did about 84, although that also had Steve Carell in it, interestingly enough. Whatever happened to Steve Carell? All right, so anyway, we'll see if Blade Runner 2049 is able to make him more of a box office draw. But I mean, I think a lot of people will be going there for Harrison Ford and Jared Leto, right? Although, interestingly, Jared Leto was not in the teaser. When Jared Leto shows up in the Blade Runner 2049 advertising, by the way, it's going to explode, okay? Like, the Blade Runner 2049 teaser did pretty well at the media, but there wasn't a lot of interest, I think, with the general public and like cinephiles and stuff. People didn't, it's like it was no Ghost in the Shell in terms of the reaction, which I think is fascinating, considering Blade Runner came first. But anyway, we'll see what happens with Ryan Gosling as a box office commodity. But right now, I mean, I think that could be pretty interesting, First Man. But I think, we'll see how it goes. But good for Damien Chazelle for getting his deal now, just to ensure that he has his next project all set to go. All right, so on to the viewer question. This kind of ties into what Ben Mendelsohn was talking about. This comes from Herschel Katz. Hello, Herschel. And Herschel says, Dear Grace, question. With various movies in the past year, the movies ended up missing some of the stuff from the trailers. Rogue One, for example, was missing some lines from the trailers. So much from the trailers. Batman v Superman didn't have a bunch of dialogue and scenes as shown in the trailers, so an extended cut was made. The same went for Suicide Squad. So my question is this: who decides what footage goes in a trailer, and why do certain scenes get cut? Basically, why do trailers keep misleading what actually ends up being shown? Love your channel. Thanks. Smiley faces. Herschel, great question. Wonderful question. And my answer is that the studios aren't as nefarious as you might think they are. So at this point, especially blockbusters, and these are all blockbusters that we're talking about, studios, they don't really quite know what they're doing, as you can see from what happened with shooting with Rogue One. So they wait till the very last minute to lock picture on these movies. They're putting them in front of test audiences. They're putting them in front of everybody they can think of within the studio to get their notes on it. So often a big blockbuster won't lock picture, which means it's ready to go to print. It's done until like a month before the movie comes out, right? So they don't know how it's going. However, inversely, while the movie isn't locked until a month before it opens, they have to start advertising it sometimes over a year in advance of its release date. Like as soon as even before, sometimes it's gone into production. Look, everybody already is talking about Gotham City Sirens. The thing hasn't even started filming. So that really puts the publicity team in a difficult position. So that's why, for instance, with John Carter, we talked about this, John Carter had really underwhelming trailers because Andrew Stanton didn't realize that he needed to shoot stuff right away so it was available to the publicity team that was exciting for the trailers. He didn't do that. For instance, the most famous example is Independence Day, the first one, where they shot the White House blowing up super early so that it could be included in the teaser, and that, of course, became the iconic image associated with the movie, which did quite well. So what they do is the publicity team can only work with what they have available to them. So they'll take the dailies, the uncut dailies from the team as they're making the movie, and they'll edit them themselves into sneak peeks. Of course, the directors will give some input, but the directors have no idea yet that those scenes aren't going to make it. They're just trying to put together a really compelling clip reel or montage or trailer or whatever. So that's why it happens. It's because the movie is actually still taking shape as it's being publicized. So when the trailers are made, they have every intention, I think, of keeping those scenes and lines. But then when the picture is being finalized, they decide to cut it. Now you can see why that's happening because they aren't actually going into production with a set script. These things are being ridiculously reworked, and and also it's not really hurting them at the box office, right? I mean, people are a little annoyed, and there are conspiracy theories about where did this footage go. But these movies, these are three of the most successful movies of the year: Rogue One, Batman v Superman, and Suicide Squad. So it doesn't hurt them quite yet. And also they're able to take that extra footage and then make an extended cut, which is very profitable in it's making Blu-rays profitable once more, and that's been a diminishing space for Hollywood. So it's all win for them so far. The only problem is going to be eventually, although I have to say, maybe Rogue One could have done better if the advertising had been a bit stronger. And this is unusual for Disney to have this happen to them. And it doesn't happen, of course, with the Marvel movies. They're, I think, very well constructed going in. They don't have to do like a whole lot of tinkering. And I would expect they go in with scripts that are done. Everybody works differently. So maybe Rogue One took a little bit of a hit. We'll never know for sure. It might just be, it can't be another The Force Awakens. I'd be curious how you guys feel. I hated the advertising for that movie. I also didn't like the advertising for Doctor Strange. I thought both those movies were poorly advertised. And Doctor Strange, interestingly enough, has stalled domestically. But still, it's considered a success. But I think that I think Hollywood is struggling with I think they're very nervous because there's so much money put into these things. And I think also, to be perfectly honest with you, I think a lot of times the people who make these big blockbusters aren't the type of people who would go and see them. So they're like, I don't know what they'd like. I'm going to try my hardest, and that's why you have these problems to some degree. And maybe that's why Kevin Feige's so successful. Kevin Feige is a huge comic book fan. So since he comes from that space and he knows what the audience would be interested in, he has a little bit more self-confidence in the product that he's making. Whereas I think maybe some of these other people are like, I don't know. Okay? So that's what happens, Herschel. It's more Hollywood having a difficult time transitioning into this new type of space, dealing with this new, and also old movie fans, like from generations ago, wouldn't have paid attention to that these scenes were missing. But because we can freeze frame things now, we pay such close attention, they're getting caught with a lot of their tricks, which is also very interesting as well. So anyway, that's my answer to your question, and I do think that it's interesting that this is working for Hollywood because they're getting the money at the box office, and then they use the extended footage to create popular DVDs and Blu-rays. Although I have to say, if I were Rogue One, I would not release that extra footage. I think it's a great movie the way it is, and I don't like one of my problems with Batman v Superman, although some people like the extended cut better, a lot of people actually, is that I think it's like you're like, at the end of the day, you're like, well, what's the actual movie, right? Like, what's the actual movie? When I say I like Rogue One or I like Batman v Superman, is there really a definitive version of it? And that's a problem. That would be a problem going forward. There needs to be definitive versions of these movies. Or not, if they're just going to become like video games. I don't know. It's weird. All right. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Thank you for your question, Herschel. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Please write down below, I think, today's top 3 stories, Herschel's viewer question, and, of course, I hope you have a wonderful new year, and I will see you back for Morning Movie News in 2017. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.